in this. Okay, recording in progress. So everybody knows it's recording. And then because of my engagement, and I had the chance to be part of many events actually since 2015, especially at the peak of the rise of conflicts and wars in our time. And I had the chance to be partner also and consultant in some global events, for example, the World Humanitarian Summit that took place in 2016 in Istanbul, and then also be part of the summit itself as a diaspora representative. Since then, we have been also working and leading projects on the ground, especially in Syria and Iraq, and that may be very close to some areas where the conflict is still active, and at the same time also to take a global and some regional inputs about what's going on the other sides of the world. For these reasons, I will be just giving some back information about these global plans that have been made, such as the SDGs 2030 plan and then the World Humanitarian Summit commitments, and why they were important and still important till today, and then also tomorrow for ending conflicts. To better understand why conflicts are going on, how can we end them, and what should we do on a local level, on a regional level, and on an international level. Of course, this will be according to my personal experience, and hopefully after the presentation is done, we will be having a discussion and also to hear from other people who are experts in the field to share stories about this, and then to learn from each other how we really can get things done amidst chaos. So I will start a presentation, sharing my screen now with you, and then I will go into some slides, and after that we come back to continue our discussion. For this presentation, I just want to comment, like actually I was not sure that I will join the conference because I was assigned for another event to give a presentation today in Germany, in Leipzig, for climate change in relation to SDGs, but this has been canceled due to weather conditions. And then I jumped and then prepared myself for this event, and I hope my input will be of value for the people who are in this group session. So let me start sharing my screen with a short presentation that I have prepared 1 hour ago. Let's start. We can do this. So getting things done in the time of chaos. This is actually something very challenging, and everybody working in the humanitarian field or in the development or even civil society activism will keep asking this question to himself. When this question to my mind, I had to go back to history, actually, how this started and what were the global actions that took place for this to really end the conflicts in the time of chaos, especially rising wars in our time. And then it came to my mind that I don't know why the slide is not working. I want to do it manually. Just a moment. Sorry. So I was asking myself actually where started, and then in 2015 with the first summit of SDGs that was called for the former Secretary General of UN, Ban Ki-moon, as a response to start improving the life conditions of people in our world. And when this summit happened in 2015, there were clear goals that everybody aware of, the 17 goals for this plan. But however, after that, everybody thought, how can we achieve these goals with the rise of conflicts in the world? And then something else started in Geneva, which was the global consultations about how to end conflicts in the world, which led to have the very first humanitarian World Summit, and that happened in 2016. In the World Humanitarian Summit, as we see in the first slide, Sustainable Development Goals, there were core humanitarian standards from one side, and then at the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, there was something that were created called Agenda for Humanity. This Agenda for Humanity has been set with some core commitments, and the hope behind that was to invite the political leaders and the heads of states to make commitments to end conflicts in the world. And the core commitments that were set, I really find them very important, and till today, they were the first one, which is the most important one that I find, in my personal opinion, was political leadership to prevent and end conflicts. And the other one that I found it very important was from delivering aid into ending the need of people. And if we see this agenda for humanity that had a direct link to the Sustainable Development Goals from one side, and also to push the political leaders into commitments with the humanitarian standards, humanitarian principles from one side, and also to take actions on the state level to end conflicts. However, since then, since 2015, since the summit of the SDGs, and then the next summit of the World Humanitarian Summit, we see today that the conflicts have arisen. And when we ask ourselves, what was the reason for that? Was it the commitments that have been made? People and states were not committed to. Why this happened? Although we had all these two big plans, the SDGs from one side, and then in the World Humanitarian Summit, Agenda for Humanities, and commitments that more than 50 heads of states committed to. And the World Humanitarian Summit, there were around 9,000 representatives attended, with 50 head of states, including many countries that made commitments on the country level that they will be committed to end conflicts. And this is actually in the last years till today, till we see the conflicts arise increasingly and then reached, in my opinion, its peak. Therefore, this has been affect both actually the stability and development in the last years. And then if we look at the Global Peace Index for 2022, we see that the conflicts have arisen greatly. The main areas of conflicts, according to the Peace Index 2020, are the MENA region. MENA region is considered now actually the peak of of violence and conflicts in the world. And then Europe continent is the most peaceful and stable continent in the world, according to the Global Peace Index 2020. And if we go to the most countries that are affected by war, to see the cost of war, how much it costs to the world, the countries that are in the list, Syria is actually in the first place, and then the other countries, that are 5 countries from the MENA region that are in this list, which makes the MENA region the most area or the continent that has the violence in the world. However, if we see also as the GBV, the cost of war in those countries, we see that the GDP index, like more than half of the income of the country goes to war and weaponry. And this is something that is just making, let's say, the development process, which is linked to the SDGs, much harder, and most of the global funds that are spent actually on humanitarian response rather than to be spent on development or ending the need of the people. If we look at the other countries and then that has more peace, we see that there is like the GDP for this country, or the income, the money used for this country, only 2% goes for, let's say, dealing with cases of violence, which makes a very big difference, and also to make us understand why this is happening, how conflict can cause the destruction of a country's economy, not only the people and life. If we look at the cost of wars for the year 2021 only, there has been 16.5 trillion US dollar. They were spent on actually wars and conflicts in the world. Imagine this, imagine this money, $16 trillion were spent on development and a response to development on the grassroots in countries where they need, for example, basic services, water access, for example, drinking water, to use this money to establish dignified life for the countries that are under conflict. But on the other side, if we look at it, this amount of money has been spent on wars. We understand from my first slide, like, was it because of the political leadership from one side, or why? Probably, if we go and think about it a bit, we will see, like, as humanitarian actors, as NGOs, they have been very active since 2016 with the agenda for humanity. There is a high level of response on the sectorial level and also from the local civil society. However, the conflicts are going and continuing, and that's because that the commitments that have been made in the World Humanitarian Summit, actually, they were not monitored. There was no monitoring mechanism for the commitments that have been made by states in the World Humanitarian Summit. And if we look at the agenda for humanity, this tool has been only used till 2019. In 2019, the agenda for humanity and then self-reporting has been archived. And till today now, all the governments and all the actors that have committed to those 5 core principles, including political leadership to end conflicts, is not being monitored. Now, as we are in the International Day of Non-Violence, and actually I was thinking just to give an overview about this global agenda on one side, and on the other side to think about conflicts. Why conflicts are happening in the world? Is it because people demanding change? And if people demanding positive change, why the states are not responding to those demands of the people? Why force is being used? Is it not smarter for the state leaders to have peaceful manners to respond to the demands of the people in their countries rather than to use weapons and violence, which cost a lot of money? And then one of the examples that we see, we can look at one example from the past, because the examples that are in our present time, they are many actually, where demands of people ended with very high level of violence in many countries in the MENA region, for example, since 10 years, and they are still ongoing. However, if we think about peace, is it really driving us, if we experience violence, to also start using violence against others? Is it justified, if we ask ourselves this question? Regardless where we are living, if we are living in a poor country or a rich country, a country that witnesses violence, peace starts on the individual level. And before I go to the next example, to give an example about people's demands and for positive change and then response of a state, I had the chance to meet His Highness the Dalai Lama in the Norway in the International Student Festival in 2015. And I always had a question in my mind. And I speak here as a Syrian because I also witnessed conflicts and violence. And then I was thinking in myself, why people or why powerful states just don't use their armies to go and end a conflict in a country? Why the NATO, for example, is not going and to Syria and just making peace? Why they don't use force to enforce peace? And then I thought, okay, there was a chance to meet the Dalai Lama. And then I asked His Highness, do you believe in a peace that was enforced with violence? Do you believe in that peace? And then he told me, do you? And then he didn't answer further. He just told me, do you? Then I have been thinking since then, do we use violence to enforce peace? This question till today, actually, till I saw this invitation and the title, How to Get Things Done in the Chaos, I thought, I finally realized, no, we should never use violence, even if we suffer, because violence just produces violences. And one successful example of people demanding positive change happened just around 30 years ago in Germany, actually, where I am living right now. In East Germany, there was also a government that was suppressing the freedom of opinions and people liberties, and there was a hard use of violence and then control from the Secret Service in East Germany in the 80s, then people decided just to demonstrate, to start demanding change in a peaceful way. However, in that time, people were also having fears, and they were afraid to go to the streets and talk because it was actually forbidden. Anybody who would talk would be taken alone. But people gathered together, and then in October 9th, 1989, which now actually is the beginning of October, and today is the day of the German unity, people just went to the streets peacefully, and they made their slogan, whatever happens, we will not use violence. And then in that day, there were tanks on the streets, and there were police, and even the military actually were marching and marching on the streets. When people came to the streets, and they never reacted to the police or to the violence or any violence, because in any state, the state also have fears from the people who are bringing states to power and then removing states to power. So in that day, people decided to just be peaceful and go together to the streets. And then just after 1 week, the number of people increased into 120,000 people on the streets here in this city where I live now, Leipzig. And then the police and all the army soldiers there, the tanks, they were just surprised to attack or not to attack. They were just waiting one single violent move from any demonstrator, so they make it as an excuse and then attack those people. However, this number increased, and then the next week, it doubled actually. It reached 340,000 people demonstrating, and then those people started marching towards the wall. And then, as we see in the next example, the people actually, the power of people in a peaceful manner, then succeeded. And then that's one example that we will look at now, because we are actually, I brought this example because today is the day of the German unity, and also today is the International Day for Non-Violence. So this is one example about positive change that we can look at this video together. It's a documentary.
أعوذ بالله الله أكبر.
I don't know if something happened here. Someone is writing. I don't know what's happening. Moderator.
We're sorry, Abdulaziz. I think we have somebody technical issues. So
I don't know what's happening. Actually, was presenting the video.
The Russian
Is anybody right?
Yes, we're taking out the person now.
Okay. That's a bit embarrassing. Indeed. It's very embarrassing, actually, what happened.
Yes, we apologize, Abdulaziz.
Okay, I saw, okay, there are weird people everywhere. And so I will just continue, actually, this example, and then we will go to another example. Sorry for this, what happened. I hope I had control over that, but actually, we are all free to do, and I hope we can use this freedom for good things. So I will just continue the documentary, and we can look at this documentary. It's really interesting. And then we can go to another example from another region, which is the MENA region. So as we saw, that was actually one example that from a country, and is Germany. They were really under suppression and under state control. But when people come together peacefully, they can make a positive change, and they should never change their methods into violence, because violence only makes more violence, and then that causes just more blood. Another actually thing about violence and then peace and war, something that happens now in our modern time, especially in so many parts of the world, including the MENA region, which is water. Water might be the next actually issue that will cause conflicts in our world. It's not only because of natural disasters, lack of rain and drought, but also because of man-made disasters. Water is being used actually as a tool in our time. In some countries, this is used as a tool of war to control the neighboring states. We know about many conflicts that have been caused because of water in Africa or in the Mediterranean region. We know, for example, about the conflict which is still going on between Greece and Turkey on the regional waters. Or we know about also the water conflict that happens between Egypt on one side and the other countries on the Nile. But now water is being used more than that. For example, between Iraq, Syria, and Turkey and Iran, there is now a conflict of water actually going on since many years, the control of waters. For example, some countries from those 4 countries have been starting building dams just to stop the water on the other countries to use it as a card. But however, those dams that has been used to just control another country, they have actually dramatic consequences, not only on the country itself, from the natural level. For example, it causes sometimes earthquakes, it causes change of the demography, and also it causes the destruction of many villages, sometimes at least thousands, and cities. One of the examples that happened in the last years, it was in Turkey, by building a mass dam that caused actually the destruction of a whole city that has been around 10,000 years old. Now, if we, as we saw from the beginning, like violence causes counter-violence, and any action actually costs always on the other side a counter-action, especially between governments and states. Now, as Turkey have been building those dams, and then the water now is not going to Iraq and Syria. Both the countries, Iraq and Syria, they have a water crisis right now, especially on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And this has actually forced many indigenous people in both countries, those who have been living from agriculture and fishing, to just leave their areas. Not only the life on the land has been threatened, but also the life under the land, underwater actually. And beside that, many historical sites that have been recognized by UNESCO have been destroyed. Now, if we look at a counter example, like Iraq country, for example, as a response to what happened from Turkey's side, they decided to start building a dam as well. And this is actually a state action, but this dam was supposed to be built 20 years ago. Then they stopped this project. And right now, the activist groups that are from Iraq, they are trying to make an awareness about this, like building this dam as a response to Turkey, for example, is not the solution, because this will destroy our life further. And this is actually one example which is happening now about water in Iraq, which is the Makhul Dam. This dam, if it's built, it will threat around 250,000 people living there on the branches of the Tigris that have been living there since centuries. It's a whole culture. Not only that, it will also force them actually to leave that areas to nowhere. Now, this is a video about the effects of using a water as a tool for conflict, and how this is causing actually counter actions from the other side. But the only impact, actually direct impact, will be on the poor people, on the villagers, and on the farmers, and on the communities. I will just start also this video for you to have a vision about what's happening right now in our time with water as a tool for war and conflict. And this video has been prepared by a group of activists and networks from the Iraqi civil society called Save the Tigris Network. We will look at this dam, Makhul Dam, which will cause, has disaster consequences on. All those footages are actually being taken by Save the Tigris, and they are actual photos. So I will stop the presentation here. And I just wanted to give you actually an example, because when I thought about chaos, chaos is everywhere. It's not only where we are living, it's a world issue. And I try to just to understand also for myself why conflicts are not ended till now, why we are still having wars, why we are still having conflicts in the world, why the governments are not changing their policies and towards the people, and why everybody is knowing that the cost of war is too high, that this cost for weaponry and weapons, purchasing weapons, making armies, if it's used for development, we can use those resources actually to face the natural disasters, for example, that's happening in our time due to climate change, drought, and many other cases. So I try to make this presentation actually as much as possible that we also think about how this started, how response plans are started, on the humanitarian level, on the political level, and are we doing our part from the story to get things done in the midst of chaos, regardless where we are, on the local level or on the regional level, or even to contribute on the international level. Now, by looking at those slides, actually, we see like there were also state commitments, but are those commitments have been monitored and have been implemented till today? And if yes, why we still have conflicts? On the other side, if we look at the humanitarian actors, the NGOs, and the work that has been done, there is a lot of work and response is happening everywhere. Actually, I am one of the humanitarian workers that have been witnessing this since years. But we just see that there is increase in the needs for humanitarian response, while to try to end the real needs of the people on the ground is going down because of ongoing conflicts. And this is actually a question not only for me, or even not for not for the people who are in this group. It's a question for everybody that is asking himself now, especially with the new crisis that's happening now because of gas, and in Europe, for example, that is affecting the whole world. So for me, I'm just also presenting this question to everybody and other experts in this discussion. Why the conflicts are going on? Why is it because of us as humanitarian actors? We are not doing our jobs. Is it because of civil society is not getting engaged, monitoring, and then making positive change, or leading and helping positive change for people on the ground? Or is it because of governments and state actors that are not committed? And I will actually start slowly stopping here and to open the stage also for any questions or comments, or even more input from other co-friends and humanitarians and civil society activists who are in this discussion. And I would like to really heartily apologize from what happened. It was actually not a nice thing, and I'm really sorry for that. I couldn't control that, was out of my control.
Thank you so much, Abdulaziz. Your presentation was really interesting. Thank you for sharing all of your experiences and these examples with us. And indeed, the question, like you asked, is why do conflict keep happening? It's something that, you know, almost everyone, especially in the humanitarian world, ask ourselves, why do these conflicts happen? And why can't just everybody live in peace? And why can't it just be peace around the world? And of course, some of the highlights for me from your presentation is, again, how dwindling of natural resources can further exacerbate conflict in some areas. And we have a hand up. Sophia wants to ask a question. So Sophia, please go ahead.
Thank you. So Aziz, first of all, we want to thank you so much for being at the conference. I think the apologies are ours because, as you said, we use our freedoms for what we want, either something good or bad. So I think it also is a reflection of where we are in the world today, and the fact that we may have digital freedoms or other kinds of freedoms, but we use them irresponsibly sometimes. So no worries, we apologize. I wanted to just kind of add a little, maybe it's about a comment and a question. So there's this whole concept, and of course, some would even call it a conspiracy theory, but it seems like the powers that be want to keep the global South in violent conflict. So after colonialism and all of those things have happened, even right now, resources are being drained from the richest countries, which actually in resources are global South countries. Do you think that there's any iota of truth to this, that there is a deliberate attempt by politicians, people in power, decision takers, to keep the global South down and in constant violent conflict? Over to you.
It's actually a very big question, and it's so concrete. Indeed, there are also actually people now, or many people believe, like, if they call it conspiracy, or maybe it's really happened. But if we should know and understand what's happening now and what will happen tomorrow, we also need to know what happened yesterday, not only just 20 years ago, but 100 years ago. Now, everybody, many actually even journalists argue that there might be a new system coming to the world. That's why we witness all this instability and all these conflicts that's happening in our time. We know, like, for example, since a survey treaty that happened in the Middle East, for example, an establishment of many new states, political states in that area, that was not only establishment of new states, but there were also other, let's say, treaties that happened regarding the natural resources of those countries. And it's not just in the Middle East or Africa, even in Latin America. I just had a meeting with civil society, migrant civil society organizations, actually last weekend in Leipzig, and I met some representatives from Argentina. Then they were saying, like, we are having forced migration of the indigenous people in Argentina till today. There are a government, and our government cannot do anything for it because they have had treaties since some 70 years ago with some Western countries that in exchange to the natural resources, they will give financial stability to that country. Now, that's one of the examples that happens. Indeed, there are sometimes some treaties that have been forged in the past in another generation. It might be after the First World War, the Second World War, and they were coming to an end soon, maybe next year, some of them. And many countries that have signed such treaties, they are looking for a new change. Some of them are having economic ambitions to start, for example, industry in their country. Some other countries that were not allowed, for example, to dig for oil in their country or for natural resources, after the end of those treaties, they are now willing to start also finding their own resources and use it in their own industry and then start production. We might have actually a change in the economic system in the world. Any political conflict that happens, any military conflict that happens, it has always an economic background, economic reason. And this is actually very true. Many people, even in response to your question, ask themselves now, what is the UN doing? What is the UN? Why the UN was established at the first place? Now, if we look at the history of the UN since 70 years, it was actually established to keep peace and stability in the world among states that have emerged after a very long-term war, global war. And then the UN agency, the UN as a system, as a governmental, intergovernmental organization, is trying to keep peace by keeping stability and the system as is. Now, we ask ourselves, is the whole system collapsing? Is it because of many treaties that happen between countries and states from one side? Or is it because that the UN as an organization that always interfered into peace and conflict to keep the stabilization of the world, the order, the economic balance is collapsing? Of course, many people, they have different answers from different perspectives, but we are actually indeed going into a new era. And this era, how it will be, how it should be, nobody knows. Many countries that are even engaged, regardless if they have conflict directly in their countries or not, they are already engaged with conflicts in other countries. And by 2020, 30, for example, in the MENA region, there are some treaties that will be ended next year. For example, the Sevre. For example, Turkey is very ambitious to go into industry and into waters and regional waters. And there are many other countries in other continents that wants to have this, to say why we are always buying from a Western market, why we don't produce things ourselves, why some other countries are still suffering from policies that happened 100 years ago. For example, as I said, Argentina, the indigenous people in Argentina till now, they don't have access to water facilities and food facilities. They are just receiving ready-to-eat foods till today. And then we ask ourselves, is the Argentinian government is not able to make some water drinking system in those villages? And then some others say no, because they have a deal, they should not establish a system there because those natural resources are already sold. So I cannot really answer your question, but we need to reflect and think as human beings, as individuals, because whatever happens tomorrow, a new order of the world, a new Middle East, a new system, new powers, will there be a body that will also force them on peace and stability? For example, as the UN was founded 70 years ago to do this only task, and it's the only organization that can bring states into one table. What if this system collapses? What if there is no Security Council of UN agencies? What if governments just stop being abided by that? What will happen? Now, if we see even the war reached even Europe and the Russian-Ukrainian war, it's actually, it's causing fears for everybody everywhere, not just only in the MENA region or in Africa or Latin America, even for the people in Europe who have seen really a lot of blood in the First World War and even the Second World War. So there are fears everywhere about this change, what kind of change is coming. And then that's exactly our role as civil society, as humanitarians, as individuals. We are in a chaos. How we can get things done here? We have to really act on a local level first. What happens in my own country where I live? What can I do to change it? Then to look even at our neighbors, because what happens in the country beside me, it will affect me. For example, the same water that the Iraq is drinking, it's also the drinking water for the people in Syria. It's the drinking water for the people in Turkey, and it's drinking water for the people of Iran. So if Iran is doing something with the water, if this water is gone, it will not affect only Iran, but 4 countries. We have to stick together because our fate is linked to each other. I cannot deny the other country to raise mine. And this is something that people since 100 years, maybe we feel unfair, especially if it comes to the West and East, or let's say to the global South and then to the North, or the colonialism times. Till today, actually, it was not fair for sure, and it's not fair. And that's why we need to, in our time, if there is a change coming, it will cause a lot of blood, and it already caused a lot of blood. But let's not have another 100 years that also our children blame us that why we are not like the others. That's my answer. That's what I can understand actually from what's happening right now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdulaziz. We have another question from Usman Abdelkader. Usman wants to know what is negative and positive peace. He wants a better understanding of negative and positive peace.
Actually, that's also a big question indeed. I mean, who can decide what's negative and what's positive peace? I mean, as I said, when I had the honor to meet the Dalai Lama in Norway, and when I asked him, do you believe in a peace that's enforced by violence? Then he really didn't answer me. He told me, do you? And then that itself was an answer, like, no. Because it depends on our perspective, individual perspective. Do I think subjective? Do I think objective? Do I think inclusive? Negative, the positive peace that might be for me might be negative for the other one. For example, if I try to enforce peace in a country where I am in by force, then for sure there will be exclusion of another group, of a certain group in that enforcing peace process. So a positive peace, I believe, if I should be allowed, and if I see myself defining it, and I'm not defining it, I'm just giving my very personal opinion, I think a positive peace is a peace that will bring stability, peace of mind, resilient, and also dignified life to you and to people around you in a way that has been created through a peaceful manner and not affecting the life of others, not on the consequences of the life of others. That's something that can be called a positive peace, where you have your own peace, but you didn't take it on the account of others, because that's exactly what most of the people who are born in the Middle East or in Africa blaming the Western countries for, the colonialism countries. They enforced a peace that maybe took some of our rights. Should we do it against others? Then we are just becoming like them. So a positive peace is a peace that's achieved for you and for people around you without taking rights or causing pain or let's say violence against others. A negative peace might be, in my opinion, achieved. You might use force for it. You might take the rights of others. You might take the lands of others. You might take the waters from others to have a peace for yourself. So should we call that negative peace? I think that's something, that's peace, but it's negative because it denied the others while gave you a prosperity for your life. That's my personal opinion, and it's not a definition. I think there are people who are more into peace. They are really experts and people who dedicated their lives for peace. For example, the Dalai Lama. And I think they will be also avoiding such big question and they will not answer it.
Much, Abdulaziz. It's interesting that right now around the world, one of the conversations that is happening is the issue of peace and conflict. And we have some comments and questions. Safia says she really likes this focus on the fact that even if you do not have violent conflict in your country, you are somehow connected to violence. And so what can we as individuals do by ourselves to promote peace?
I think we should learn from our own mistakes. And I will speak about myself. In a certain time when I was living in a place where there was violence, we are being triggered to use counter-violence. And that's really a mistake. If we want long-term, durable solutions, positive solutions for ourselves and for our children and next generations and for our countries, we should really avoid demanding change through violence because that's disastrous on us and on the next generations. I think if we should start from learning from our mistakes and then avoiding them first on the individual level, and then transform this culture and that what we learned through painful situations to the next generation, to not enforce something by violence, because it will just cause more pain and more loss. We will lose more actually. Now, if I bring example, for example, Syria as an example, and I am a Syrian person, we started peacefully there. People demanded peaceful change through peaceful protest, but then suddenly violence was used because some people got, let's say, irrigated by some actions, and then counter-violence started, and now we see the whole country is in conflict and in pain and in blood. There are more than 500,000 Syrians killed in this war, and there are more than 5 million actually outside the country. The country is empty. What have we benefited? We just caused more pain to ourselves and to our children and the next generation. How many years will we need to have Syria established again? And to this question, I would say, I would start from the individual level. No matter anybody annoys me, irritates me, tries to provoke me, I will just be very honest with myself, no matter what. And even to accept less peacefully, it's better to have more by using violence. Because if you have that more by using violence, maybe after some years, your children will pay its price. And that's what's happening.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Aziz, for addressing that. And in fact, we can see that play out where, you know, we're in a vicious cycle and the conflict continues across so many generations. Courage is asking, what will be the implications of this emerging system on world peace and global economy?
Sorry,
you mentioned, you talked about emergent systems and how they affect conflicts and how they contribute to conflict. And he's asking, how can these emergent systems, what are their implications on world peace and what are their implications on global economy?
I mean, in this process, actually, it's all linked, the humanitarian sector, with the development work, with the civil society engagement, with the state actors, either if they are donors or even governments. We are in emergencies right now. There are different needs in each country. Some countries, they lack water. Some countries, they lack infrastructure. Some countries now, for example, in Europe, they are very developed countries. They lack energy, gas, and there are needs everywhere. But in this coordinated emergency response, it has to go actually in a very efficient way, but it cannot stand alone if there is no political willing with it in the state countries. Without political willingness to end conflicts, we will be just providing aid. We will spend all the financial capital that we have that's allocated for aid response, and it will be finished someday. And you see, we are just giving people a fish to eat, but we don't think about tomorrow. Now, if this emergency response to be effective, has to end the need of the people. It's not just like I go every day and provide aid, and then the next day I go provide aid, while the political process is just paralyzed. It's not improving. There is no political willing to end the conflict. There are no processes going parallel with the humanitarian response. Now, some actually people, even since 2015, they were in the World Humanitarian Summit, and then they said with the donors in the context of humanitarian response, then some donors asked them, what do you want to improve to improve your processes and operations, and also to be more effective in the emergency response? They said, and I was one of them actually, we don't want a fish, and we don't want us to teach us how to fish. We need the tools, give us the tools, and we go fishing ourselves. And that's exactly what's happening. In the emergency response, any project that's planned, even as actor or as someone who is managing projects or writing projects, why I do this project, how many people I am supporting with, and this project, will it give a tool to the persons I supported to stand alone by themselves? So what I mean here is that we have to combine development and humanitarian response together. That really we have to go from delivering aid into ending the need of the people by all means possible, because otherwise in the future, if there are, for example, a collapse in the UN system, if there are no funds allocated for humanitarian response, what will happen? What have we given to people? We have just given them one bread per day, but we didn't help them, for example, to grow fields and have a bakery and make bread themselves. Why we don't think about sustainable solutions, durable solutions? So in any, my response will be it's possible, but it has to go beside with it parallel with a political process to end conflicts from one side, and then the humanitarian response has to be so smart and to think also in development by providing aid to reach as soon as possible, ending the need of people on the ground. That's actually my answer to this question, which is really it's huge. It's a global issue.
Yes, it is. Thank you for your response. We have another question from Abdullahi. He says, the concept of violence, especially wars, are sometimes related to the financial interest of multinational corporation that controls the economy of most countries in the world. And so he wants to know from your experience, particularly dealing with migrants, do you think that this statement is valid?
It's maybe a yes and no, actually. It's valid in some cases and maybe not valid in some others, because it's linked, as I said, a government cannot just come, for example, and enforce on us to sell our natural resources if there was no wrong decisions happened by a leading government, for example. So it depends on which country context and which region context. Now, some region avoided this actually in the past, so they have a better, and let's say they are more independent with their economic freedom, even the local or national capital, while some other states, maybe the people don't know, but the state leaders know that the capital has to be rest of this country, has to be shared with a country that enforced some or forced some treaties with them in the past. And that's why this question, I would just answer yes and no, because it depends on the country context and sometimes even the continent context. It's different from one way to another, if I understood this statement right.
Much, Abdulaziz. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for sharing your experiences and the examples you have shared with us. It's indeed an insight into how peace and conflict works and what it looks like for different people around the world. Me particularly, this is the first time I'm talking to somebody from Syria, and to just hear your experience, it's really profound. I have to say my heart goes out to you and other Syrians that have to other experience in these difficult times for Syria and other countries in the world that are experiencing conflict.
Thank you.
So if you have any just additional add before we close this.
Thank you very much actually for hosting me. And then again, apologies for what happened actually during the presentation. It was a bit embarrassing. And then I would just say actually just there is a book, a very good novel actually called Pay It Forward. And then I would say here, just piece it forward. Try just to piece it forward with your neighbor, with yourself, with friends. And that's actually the only way to be ready for future, let's say, surprises that are coming soon. That's all what I can say. And I thank everybody actually for the good listening. And thank you also for organizing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our audience for listening, engaging with your comments and questions team and the and making sure that it's behind the scene. Thank you to everyone. Every session we have our polls on. Reminding you again, please go to the WUVA app. We can we have an idea for you. The poll is also here on Zoom, so you can just quickly take the poll. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. It's evening for us, and I think it's also evening for Abdulaziz. So have a wonderful evening, and a quick picture with Abdulaziz before we close this session. Thank you, Abdulaziz. So the communications team is just going to picture. Okay. Thank you. You can all turn off your videos now. Abdulaziz, we hope to talk to you again sometime soon. This was really interesting and insightful. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for taking the poll. Tomorrow's session will continue for this conference. Have a wonderful evening.
to
Baby, when we first met, strong, you were like my lover and my best friend, all wrapped into one with a ribbon on it and all. I didn't know how to follow. It's like a song that's bumped around, so empty and hollow, and I'll never give myself to another. Don't recognize the way you hurt me, do you? It's gonna take a miracle to bring me back, and you're the one to blame. You're the reason why I'm thinking I don't want to smoke any cigarettes no more. I guess it's what I can for wishful thinking. My door. Next time you wanna go and leave, or then just go on and do it. I bleed like a chicken in rehab, baby, your body's disease, yeah. Like a chicken disease, like a chicken in rehab, baby, your body's disease, rehab, baby, your body's disease, yeah. You do anything for the one you love, cause anytime that you needed me, I'll be there. It's like you were my favorite drug, me in a different way that I was using you. But now that I know it's not meant to be, I gotta go